2. Introduction. The brain is referred as a complex, multi-purpose, and flexible network that controls our behaviors and mental processes. The biological events are related to the human behavior and experiences by studying the activity in the nervous system. The nervous system comprises of the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, whereas the peripheral nervous system consists of the cranial, spinal, and peripheral nerves. Our discussion will focus on the brain, with particular attention to its structures and processes which bear its effect on cognitive models. To understand how the brain controls our experiences and behavior, we must first understand how its individual cells functions. 3. Understanding nervous system, neurons. The nervous system is composed of fibers and nerve tissues which in turn are made up of cells called neurons. There are billions of neurons in the nervous system connected with each other and therefore forming a complex network. They trigger all the activity of the nervous system to further form a communication network. This communication network helps in coordinating all the other systems of the body and enables them to function. Therefore they are termed as the essential building blocks of the nervous system. Each neuron has three main parts: cell body, dendrites, and an axon. The cell body or the soma contains the biochemical substances to keep the neuron alive. The nucleus further carries the genetic information that determines how the cell develops and functions. In the cell body, the nutrients and waste products are filtered in and out through the preamble cell wall. Dendrites emerge from the cell body as branch-like fibers. It refers from a Greek word meaning tree. Dendrites. The cell body or this communication network helps in coordinating all the other systems of. Therefore, each neuron has. The cell body or the soma contains the biochemical substances to keep the neuron alive. The nucleus further carries the genetic information that determines how the cell develops and functions. In the cell body, the nutrients and waste products are filtered in and out through the preamble cell wall. Dendrites emerge from the cell body as branch-like fibers. It refers from a Greek word meaning tree. Dendrites gather neural impulses from different neurons and send them onto the cell body. There, the incoming information is processed and combined. Axon is a long tube-like transmitting pathway, in which signals from the cell body are passed along to other cells by means of junctures known as synapses. The axon branches that are outside at the ends form a number of axon terminals, as many as several hundred in some cases. Psychology paper number. Cognitive science. Large axons are surrounded by fatty substances called the myelin sheath, which acts as a type of insulation to the neuron. These sheaths are made up of glial cells. Neurons perform certain functions that are supported by glial cells, meaning glue. Glial cells do not receive or send nerve impulses, but they are surrounded by neurons that hold them in place. They also produce nutrient chemicals that neurons need. In the figure below, the structure of the dendrites and axons makes it easy to understand how there can be trillions of interconnections in the brain, making it capable of performing the complex activities. 4. How neurons communicate. Nervous system is referred as a huge communication network which consists of an action to transmit nerve impulses from one neuron to another. Researchers have discovered that a synaptic space, a tiny gap between the axon terminal and the next neuron, passes electricity directly from one neuron to another. One of the functions of neurons is to generate electricity, another function is to produce neurotransmitter. This neurotransmitter is a chemical substance that helps to carry messages across the synaptic space to other neurons, glands, and even the muscles. Thus, chemical communication process involves 5 steps. They are namely synaptic stage, presynaptic or storage, release, binding, and deactivation. In the synaptic stage, the transmitter molecules are produced inside the neuron. The molecules are utilized by synaptic vesicles chambers that are located at the axon terminals. As the action potential reaches the axon, the vesicles then move to the surface of the axon terminal where the release of molecules takes place into the fluid-filled space between the axon and the presynaptic, sending the neurons and the membrane of the postsynaptic, which is the receiving neuron. The molecules cross the synaptic space and connect to receptor sites, which are basically large protein molecules rooted in the receiving neuron's cell membrane. Deactivation through reuptake or breakdown of neurons can take place. Other transmitter molecules are deactivated by some chemicals which are placed in the synaptic space. This further breaks them down into chemical components. In other instance, the deactivation mechanism acts as a reuptake, in which the transmitter molecules are taken into the presynaptic axon terminals. 5. Central nervous system, CNS. The central nervous system, CNS, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Our discussion focuses on the brain, with particular emphasis on its structure and functions. Cognitive science. 5.1 Brain. It is the most complex structure in the known universe, which contains 3 pounds of protein, fat, and fluids. Brain helps us in our basic physiological functions such as breathing and heart rate. The crowing feature of brain development is the cerebral cortex, thus which makes us a unique human being, for example the biological seat of Einstein's scientific genius, Mother Teresa's compassion, etc. Brain has traditionally been viewed as having 3 major subdivisions. The hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. 5.1.1 The hindbrain. It is located at the lowest level and is also the most primitive level of the brain. In the brain, the spinal cord enters and enlarges to form the structures that compose the stalk-like brain stem. The cerebellum is the other major portion of the hindbrain which is attached to the brain stem. At the brain stem life support system, the structure of the brain stem consists of pons and medulla. They support the vital life functions also shown in the above figure. Medulla is the first structure above the spinal cord and is 1.5 inch long. The medulla is well developed at the time of birth, and plays important functions such as heart rate and respiration. The presence of medulla makes these functions occur automatically. If medulla is damaged due to some reason, maybe too much of alcohol consumption, it can even lead to the death of a person or lead to serious consequence like maintain on a life support system. Blessing, 1997. Medulla acts as a two-way access road for all the sensory and motor nerve tracts. These come from the spinal cord and move down from the brain, crossing the medulla. Therefore, the brain receives the sensory information from the left side and exerts motor control over the right side of the body. The vice versa occurs when right side of the brain serves the left side of the body. The pons in Latin means a bridge, located just above the medulla and carries nerve impulse between higher and lower levels of the nervous system. Pons include multiple neurons which helps in regulating sleep and also controls vital functions like medulla, e.g. respiration. B. The cerebellum. Motor coordination. Cerebellum is also referred as little brain, which is attached to the back of the brain stem. It looks like a miniature brain, and its cortex that is a covering consists of gray cell bodies or gray matter. The primary function of cerebellum is to maintain the muscular movement coordination. Another function of cerebellum is in learning and memory. When it's referred that cerebellum controls the muscular movements, it also includes the timing with which they have to react to events. Thatch et al. 1992. It further helps in regulating the complex and rapidly changing. For example, if you are driving a car and take a stern turn to avoid collision to another car or even a ballet dancer, etc. These movements controlled by cerebellum can easily be disrupted by consumption of alcohol, producing the coordination difficulties. The cerebellum can result in severe motor disturbances such as jerky, incoordinated movements which can severely affect in walking at sea. 5.1.2 The midbrain. It is located just above the hindbrain. The midbrain contains many of motor and sensory neurons. If we focus on the sensory portion of the midbrain, it contains all the visual and auditory systems which help in relay of these centers. Here, the nerve impulses from the ears and eyes are organized and sent to forebrain that are involved in auditory and visual perception. Nolt, 1998. The midbrain also contains motor neurons that control eye movements. At the reticular formation, the brain's gatekeeper. As defined by Passer and Smith, reticular formation operate as a kind of sentry, both alerting higher centers of the brain that messages are coming and then either blocking those messages to enter or allowing them to go forward. It transfers incoming information from higher regions of the brain to alert them and also include the downward procedure where input passes through the brain and blocks out the sensory information. Reticular formation has a shape of a pencil forming the core of the brain stem and extends itself from the hindbrain up into the lower portions of the forebrain. The reticular formation arouses the cortex to keep the brain alert and attentive to new stimulation. Therefore, to summarize the above explained text, reticular formation is a part of the brain that keeps you alert, helps you pay attention to new stimulation, connected to the thalamus group of nerve fibers located inside the brainstem. Reticular formation is absolutely very essential in our life. The central role of reticular formation is in consciousness, sleep, and attention. When we refer to consciousness, it explains that we can register the sensory messages to our conscious awareness. If these nerve impulses does not reach the appropriate areas of the brain, then it seems that as if the brain is not awake enough to notice them and the neural messages are lost. The function of sleep can best be explained with the help of an example. When an alarm clock is struck, one wakes up with that sound, as this activates one's reticular formation, which further activates our cerebral cortex. In the case of an animal, if one remove the reticular formation from its brain, an animal will demonstrate brain waves indicating sleep. If a cut is made farther down, at the point where the brain stem connects to the spinal cord, normal patterns of sleeping and waking would be observed. Thus, it appears that the reticular formation is important for causing one to fall asleep and to wake up. 5.1.3 The forebrain. Psychology paper number. Cognitive science. Forebrain is considered to be the brain's highest region, with most advanced portion from an evolutionary standpoint. Forebrain is specifically involved in processing of complex information that differentiates humans from animals. The forebrain consists of the following. Limbic system consists of two structures within it, that is, hippocampus and amygdala. Thalamus, referred to as brain's sensory switchboard. Hypothalamus regulates basic biological needs. The cerebral cortex. The cortex is referred to as the outer portion of the forebrain, which is like a thin covering. Before discussing these major structures, let us understand what a cerebrum would be, as this word will appear in the following topics. Cerebrum has two large hemispheres, a left side and a right side, each wrapping around the brain in a manner to cut it into two halves. There are important differences which exist between the psychological functions of the two hemispheres. A detailed discussion on this will be done later while explaining the forebrain structure. Hence, let's start labeling these areas in our brain so that we are clear with their positioning and which can further help us in understanding their specific functions. A thalamus is located above the midbrain, which is just on top of the brain stem. The basic function of the thalamus is to systematize incoming information from sensory organs and then route appropriate part of human brain. It arranges and communicates incoming information to the different areas of the forebrain. Let us take an example. The input received from the cerebellum area is often transmitted to the motor cortex. The thalamus, with the help of reticular formation, regulates the states of wakefulness and sleep. If there is a disruption in the thalamus, then it may lead to highly confusing experiences, as the thalamus may have been sending garbled sensory information to the higher regions of the brain. This was specifically seen in schizophrenic patients when their brain images were examined. Nancy Anderson, 1994. B. Hypothalamus lies just below the thalamus and over the brain stem. It contains many small nuclei with variety of functions. The most important function of hypothalamus is to connect the endocrine system via the pituitary gland, which controls the other glands of the endocrine gland and is also termed as a master gland. Hypothalamus controls many aspects of emotion and motivation, including sexual behavior, temperature regulation, aggression, sleeping, eating, and drinking. Damage to hypothalamus can lead to major disruption in these functions. For example, destruction in one area of a male's hypothalamus can result in a complete loss of sex drive, and damage to another portion produces an overwhelming urge to eat that result in extreme obesity. Morrison, 2006. Psychology paper number. Cognitive science. It has also been seen that hypothalamus controls many hormonal secretions that helps to regulate sexual behavior and development, metabolism, and reaction to stress. C. The limbic system is made up of the two parts of the brain, namely, amygdala and the hippocampus. The Latin word for amygdals means an almond, just like its shape. It is in charge for processing emotions in humans, to understand how they become conscious of them and how one expresses them. It is also important for our survival because it helps one to differentiate between two objects. For example, damage of the amygdala might cause humans to eat their own feces, fight with the wrong enemy or person. The hippocampus is apparently involved in memory storage process as damage to this part will result in inability to store new information. Patients who have damaged hippocampus will live their day without remembering what happened yesterday. By and large, it is also involved in remembering our memories and emotions that determine which neuronal connections are strong and which should be weak. Limbic system consists of set of structures lying deep within the cerebral hemispheres. It helps in coordinating behaviors needed to satisfy emotional urges and motivation that arise in the hypothalamus. It is also involved in memory. Deep cerebral cortex is recently developed part of the brain. Like a crumpled paper, it almost enormously caps the major parts of the human brain with 80% NOLT, 1998. High-level processing is activated in this part of the brain. It has been seen that fish and amphibians have no cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is not essential for physical survival, but it is essential for human functioning. The cerebral cortex consists of two hemispheres, namely the left and the right hemispheres. In the left hemisphere, verbal processing and mathematics takes place. Verbal content includes grammar and speech. The right hemisphere is involved with all nonverbal components. These include perception for spatial task, visual recognition and emotion. Thus left hemisphere processes all the information which comes from the right side of the body, whereas the right hemisphere is associated for all the information coming from the left side. The left and right hemispheres of the brain are connected with bunch of axons called the corpus callosum. This connection between them allows communicating and integrating information with each other successfully. There are two prominent areas in the left hemisphere, namely Wernicke's and Broca's areas. In 1861, Broca's area was discovered by a French surgeon named Paul Broca. He examined a man named Tan. He was named because Tan was the only word he could speak as he had aphasia. It was seen in the autopsy of Tan that his brain was damaged in some parts of the left hemisphere. It was further observed that Broca's area is related to speech production, while Wernicke's area is significant for language comprehension. The importance of the corpus callosum was researched by Roger Sperry, 1968. He examined W.J., whose corpus callosum was surgically detached. In 1972, an experiment was conducted on the cats, where they had cut off their corpus callosums and some of the connections of their eyes which led to the brain. They found that cats required relearning after seeing a moving visual task that had been presented to the other eye. Also, they observed that logical thinking is related to the left side of the brain activity, while creative activities are more associated with right side of the brain activity. Therefore, Sperry's study is well known to be as split brain research. People. Psychology paper number. Cognitive science. Began to characterize themselves as either creative or practical, etc. Sperry's research can help in school a curriculum that needs to incorporate more creative and artistic activities for learning. The cerebral cortex consists of four lobes, namely occipital lobe, temporal lobe, parietal and frontal lobe. These association cortices are visual, auditory, motor and sensory. Each of the cerebral lobes is associated with particular sensory and motor functions, as well as with speech understanding and speech production. 1. Occipital lobe is situated just at the back side of the head, which is related in processing visual information, such as color, motion and form. Therefore, the visual association cortex and visual cortex are both to be found in the lobe. Damage to this lobe affects cross-eyeing and blindness. 2. Temporal lobe is placed just above the ears and involves processes like hearing, memory and language. The auditory association cortex, auditory cortex, and components of visual cortex are located in temporal lobe. Damage to this lobe might affect the process and storage of information. 3. Parietal lobe is situated at the apex of the head and somewhere near the rear. It helps in processing spatial location, motor control and attention, and also in perceiving pain, temperature and touch. The location of sensory association cortex is at the lobe. Albert Einstein's had 15% larger than average parietal lobe. Perhaps this is the reason that he often imagined objects in space while formulating his theories. 4. The frontal lobe is located just behind the forehead and at the top of the head. It constitutes 3.5% in cats, 17% in chimps and 30% of the cerebral cortex in humans. Therefore, it was also seen that it barely exists in rats. It is also involved in the control of voluntary muscles, personality and intelligence. The most important section of this lobe is the prefrontal cortex. It is also referred as the executive control system of the body as it is involved in reasoning, thinking, planning, organizing and monitoring or thoughts. Damage here can lead failure in distraction, direction from irrelevant stimuli, and can also lead to personality change. Both somatosensory and motor cortexes are located in this lobe. 6. Summary. Neural basis. Each neuron has dendrites, which receive nerve impulses from other neurons, a cell body, which controls the vital processes of the cell, and an axon, which conducts nerve impulses to adjacent neurons, muscles, and glands. Nervous system consists of nerve fibers which further include cells, and these are termed as neurons. Neurons consist of cell body, dendrites and an axon. Passage of the impulse across the synapse is led by chemical transmitter substances. Neurons are careful for those neurotransmitters that can stimulate them. Some neurotransmitters might excite neurons, whereas others inhibit firing of the postsynaptic neuron. The human brain consists of the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain, an organization that reflects the evolution of increasingly more complex brain structures related to behavioral capabilities. Psychology paper number. Cognitive science. Most important structures within the hindbrain consist of the medulla, which helps to check and control important body functions. The pons, on the other hand, contains important groups of sensory and motor neurons, whereas the cerebellum is concerned with motor coordination. The midbrain contains motor and sensory neurons, and even sensory and motor tracts that helps in connecting higher and lower parts of the nervous system. The reticular formation plays an important role in attention, sleep and consciousness. Activity in the ascending reticular formation excites much higher areas of the brain and further prepares them to respond to stimulation. The descending reticular formation on the other hand acts as a gate, determining which stimuli get through to enter into consciousness. The forebrain consists of two cerebral hemispheres and a number of subcortical structures. The cerebral hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. The thalamus acts as a switchboard through which impulses originating in sense organs are routed to the appropriate sensory projection areas. The hypothalamus plays an important role in many aspects of emotional and motivational behavior. The limbic system seems to be involved in organizing the behaviors involved in motivation and emotion. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes, namely frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobes. Some areas of the cerebral cortex receive sensory input, some control motor functions, and others, the association cortex, are involved in higher mental processes in humans. The frontal lobes are particularly important in such executive functions.